Hey everybody, we'll get started in a minute or so. Okay, we can get started. Thanks a lot, everybody, for joining. Our focus today is going to be to talk about identity governance and how the OpenIAM platform can be used to address identity governance needs as they come up in different corporations, right? And the various needs that come up. So we're going to break up the webinar into a few different parts. So we'll start out by talking a little bit about the IGA landscape. We'll then talk about the OpenIAM solution, some of the capabilities in it, look at it a little bit more from the technical perspective and the architecture capabilities. And then we'll go ahead and do a demo, and we'll exercise some common use cases that we see. Okay. As always, if you have questions as we go through, feel free to post them. I prefer to keep these sessions interactive. So let's go from there. Okay. So if we look at most corporations, like most mid to large corporations, and their IT environment, we find today that they have really a blend of applications which are part on-premise. They have your database servers, your Active Directories and things like that, which are running on-prem. And then there's a whole collection of cloud applications, and then there's also a mix of the cloud providers today. So more and more people are using services like AWS and Azure and Google Cloud to be able to host their applications. And from an identity perspective, being able to manage such a diverse environment is, to say the least, is complex. Okay, and part of this whole complexity that comes with this environment is, once on one hand you have identities that are propagated outside of the corporate network. There's complexities around managing the user lifecycle, especially if there's not an automated solution to be able to keep track of creating these users and knowing that they exist, and making sure that when people change jobs, to be able to take away the access, and more importantly, when they leave, to be able to manage that. Those things are kind of important. There's a question that's just been posted the question is really a very specific use case about integrating with free IPA and Open LDAP, and also how to set up TOTP. So just to comment on that, when it comes to setting up TOTP, we do have a both documentation and a webinar that we can share on that. And also when it comes to free IPA and Open LDAP, we'll have a separate topic on that as well. In this particular session, we'll talk about concepts where you can apply them to looking at how MFA can be done as well. Okay, but kind of going back on our focus here, that we really need to be able to manage, when people get access, and track who's got access across the board. And ensure that they don't have access any longer than they actually need to, right? And so to address that challenge, it's really important to have a IGA tool in place. And so from that perspective, we're going to kind of transition into what OpenIAM can do. And while the problems of identity are pretty common, every vendor, and OpenIAM is no different in that respect, and how we solve those problems is going to vary a little bit. Okay? So the next couple of slides are really going to focus on some of the functionality that we have within OpenIAM. So if we look at, so the most fundamental thing that we need to do is manage user lifecycle management, right? And so in this perspective, we can be integrating to one or more source systems, and the data that comes out of those source systems, we can apply either role or rule-based provisioning to them and be able to control, what systems people are going to get, right? There's also reconciliation to make sure that people who are not updating those systems, directly or outside of the control of IAM, and we want to be able to track them and have rules in place about what to do when those conditions do happen. Okay. There's also a self-service portal where, and we'll look at this pretty closely when we do our demo, in terms of being able to allow end users to be able to request access and to know what access they have, as well as what their direct reports may have, right? To be able to see those things end to end. Also, more ordinary things are required in terms of, like, you forgot password or changing your password. These kind of things, as much as they've kind of become commonplace today, having them in a unified way allows us to kind of synchronize, these objects across the board. And it just significantly reduces the strain on your help desk. You have to not have to do this stuff manually. Right? And the other part is that workflow is a really important part of IGA. So in a lot of our customers that we have, that there are things which are considered birthright access that we grant automatically. And then there are things that are either requested or that require approval. And so in that respect, having workflow is really important. And in our case, all the out-of-the-box workflows, they're all multi-approver out of the box, and they all have the notion of SLAs in them, where you can say, well, if somebody hasn't responded in a certain amount of time, then we want to send out reminders and possibly escalations. And a key driver to IGA today is basically audit and compliance. So, in some background, we started OpenIAM 13 years ago, and a lot of our earlier customers were really interested more in automated, user lifecycle management, to be able to save costs by automating these things. I would say that more than half of our customers today, the driver is audit and compliance. They want to reduce the cost of, what it takes to be able to be compliant and be able to target, say, your SOC 2 audits and things like that. Right. So we've got fine-grained audit, and we'll take a look at that as well as we kind of go through it. And a common theme across OpenIAM as a platform is that we have a rich REST API to the point where everything that we can do on our UI is really it's got a corresponding API operation to it. So in concept, if you wanted to, you could throw away the entire UI, and you could use the REST API to be able to build your own interface. There are customers who have very specific needs, especially when they're external facing, that they will use a REST API to actually build out a full UI and have a very customized solution for it. So kind of talked a little bit about, the kind of things we can do with OpenIAM. The next slide is really talking a little bit about how OpenIAM's, pieced together. So in this diagram, we kind of see that there's options of some source systems kind of feeding OpenIAM. There's some target systems that we can provision to. And everything else in the middle is really, the core part of OpenIAM itself. So, since we have a services-based architecture, you'll see that there's a lot of services which are available, and they're broken up by the kind of things that they do. So shared services, for example, are services which are used by IGA and access management, and they're kind of common to the platform. So things like user management, your audit, your access control model, those are not unique to IGA or web access management. So therefore they're considered shared services, right? But then there's separate things. And in some cases, like authorization manager, which is really access control, is made its own service because there was a need for greater flexibility there. And so it's its own service, and it's got more flexibility about which backend it can use and things like that, right? And the things which are in gray here, these are all the infrastructure components. So for example, Vault is we use HashiCorp's Vault. So all of our secrets are maintained inside the Vault. The The graph database is used for storing the hierarchical access control model. It allows us to do fast searches. We have some customers where they have a massive number of entitlements, like exceeding over 100,000 objects. So in this case, having a graph database allows us to get to that information a lot quicker than, say, in a relational model. And then there's some things we use across the board, like RabbitMQ ties all the services together. Services generally don't talk to each other directly. They're loosely coupled by going through the message bus. And that gives us some interesting options down the road, because if you're deploying in the cloud and you have on-prem systems, you probably don't want your on-prem, your cloud applications talking to every single one of your on-prem systems by having its own direct connection. So we can create a connector VM that's on-prem and then use the message bus to be able to talk to it. And this way we significantly increase security by just opening up one IP and one port to make that communication work, right? Things like file beats are used more for in a containerized environment where we want to take the low-level system logs and push them into the Kibana area and be able to use, render them through our monitoring tool, right? So there's the different services here to be able to complement the overall objective. This next slide just kind of talks a little bit about the different connectors which are there, and there are probably about 40 plus connectors which are there out of the box, and they cover a broad range of things from your infrastructure components like your databases and Linux and Windows servers to very specific business applications, like, for example, like for OpenLDAP or for free IPA, or as well as SAP and Oracle EBS, right? So there's some diversity, and this list is always growing. And the framework's open, so if you needed to add new connectors to it, you can certainly introduce your own into the mix. Skip past this. It's kind of just more like cloud focus at this point. And this diagram just kind of describes like what I was just describing a second ago about the ability to be able to move your connectors around and use the message bus for it. So in this diagram, we're really kind of showing that, a business which may have both on-prem and cloud deployments, and how you would deploy and integrate to your on-prem world. Okay. And obviously, Workday is here just an example. It could be any HR system. Okay. A couple other things which are there, which are helpful in certain cases, is, for example, there's an AD password filter, which allows for like a reverse password sync. So, for example, OpenApp supports password synchronization, and so but if the user is to go into the AD desktop, or say the Windows desktop, and change the password there, then it would go to AD, and then the filter will pick it up, push it back into OpenIAM, and then that will then sync it back across the board. Okay, so it gives people the flexibility to work the way that they want to work, and it will allow them to be able to integrate back. Okay. There's also these are optional in the sense that optional to deploy. They included in the stack. There are credential providers for Windows and Mac, and what you can do with the credential providers is that basically you're replacing the login screen of the Windows or Mac desktop. And in that, you can introduce things like, if forgot password functionality, you can introduce MFA. And MFA is, in this case, tied to our adaptive auth framework. So, for example, if somebody's working from home, you can control where they're actually coming from. So if they're always coming in from, say, New York, and now they're coming in from, say, San Diego, we know that this person is no longer working from where they said they would be working for, and we can have policies to be able to control that and take action and ultimately stop them. Okay. All right, so at this point, let's jump into the demo. We'll come back to the other slides after the fact. So there's a question, is there a connector for Oracle Fusion Cloud? I believe that there's a connector for Oracle Fusion Cloud, which is in development. We don't have a release date for it yet. So yeah, I think that, and I think I've had a request for it maybe a few months ago as well, but it's not out yet. Okay. So at this point, first thing you can do is log into the demo environment, and let's just kind of poke around a little bit in terms of how certain things are configured. So the OpenIAM UI is kind of broken up into three parts. There's an IDP, there's a admin console, which we call the web console. And then there's also a self-service portal, right? So in this case, let's log into the admin interface, and a few things that we set up for this demo. So first is we set up a bunch of connectors. So in OpenIAM, this is more for terminology purposes. There's a notion of connectors and managed system. A connector is a piece of software which can talk to a type of system. Like say, for example, if you wanted to talk to Oracle Fusion, there might be an Oracle Fusion connector. But there might be more than one tenant in Oracle Fusion, or there might be more than, say, one Open LDAP out there. And so in that case, we would have multiple managed system configurations. And when those connections are enabled, you'll see that there's a health check going on. And the health check basically allows you in production to know that your system, your connections are still up. Linked to this can be alerts, which will, can be notifying someone that says that there's a problem and you should take a look, right? So in this case, we see that there are connectors to connections to like a Linux box, Office 365, AWS, AD, right? And if we were to open these up, we would see, let's just open up AD because it's really pretty common. You'll see that on the first screen that basically we're establishing, a connection with the service account. And then there are two tabs on the side which we care about. So one is policy map, and a policy map shows that for each object type, there's a mapping. So, for example, you open this up. So here we see all the fields in AD, the attribute names that we want to be able to manage. And policies are the rules which will provide values for each one of them. So, for example, SAM account name is something which is going to be system generated. And for that, we have some rules of how it's going to work. And so in this case, the rule is really simple, is honoring the fact that SAM account name cannot be more than 20 characters long, right? And it also has to be unique, right? So it will, the logic here will take care of that. But the idea is that you can shape this to be based on what you need to. And if your schema is customized, you can just click here and add new attribute names and save it and build out your schema to map to what you need to. Right? So it is flexible in that respect. And reconciliation is used to be able to control what is going on between OpenIAM and a target system. So if I open this up, I see that there's going to be a regular schedule of when it's going to run, and then down below there are some conditions of what to do. So for example, if it's been deleted in OpenIAM but it exists in your AD, then what should I do? In this case, it says add it to IDM. But I could have also deleted it from IDM. I could have done something else. I could have sent out a notification, right? There are a number of different ways that I could deal with this. Okay? So once I have that, then the next part is to define some roles. So here, if I go to the role management screen, I'm going to open up, create a role called Help Desk. And if I open that up, that role is going to, so in this case, it's actually protected. So the question about TOTP, there are a few different options now. There is, I can have it sent to me. There's a Twilio integration, so you can receive a phone call to get the OTP. There's also a mobile app. In this case, I'm just going to have it being sent to me so I can cut and paste. And it will take a second. And this could be a way to basically ensure that certain sensitive information is only being edited by the people that you want it to be. Okay. So here we define our role for help desk, and then we can also have like a role owner and a role admin. These could be used by the workflows, and say role entitlements will control what we can do. So here we're saying these are the applications that I'm allowed to be provisioned to. And so, so this is fine. So at this point, we know that we could potentially provision, and if you're a member of a role, what you should get. But there's a missing link here, which is how do we become a member of this role? And so for that, there's a notion of business rules. And in the business rules engine, we can define various conditions. So for example, let's say we have a business role called manager. And here I've got an attribute that says, if the title is equal to manager, then I'm going to become a part of this role. Now, this list could have been much more extensive. So I can have other criteria. I can have and/or relationships, to kind of evaluate these. And then if they're true, then I'm going to execute the do part of this. And if they're false, I'm going to execute, the on undo. And that will basically remove me from that access. So if I look at, say, manager business role, then I can see over here that in the manager business role gives me membership to 2 groups in Azure. Had I been in a developer role, I would have gotten a slew of other entitlements, ranging from Elasticsearch to Docker and RabbitMQ, right? So these business rules can be set in a more end user friendly way, and they can be updated. And if they are changed, there are tools in place to be able to detect the impact of the change, and also to see who the users were after the change occurred. Okay. So now that we have the foundation of the system, let's go ahead and basically bulk create a few users. So for our purposes, we created a small CSV file, and it's got some users. It's got some titles which are used here, which will be used by the business rules, and there's an employee ID which is making them all unique. Okay, so let's just go to provisioning and then synchronization, and from here we can upload this new file. And so from the synchronization, this is what would be used to kind of integrate with your HR system potentially. And so we can say where the source is coming from, and if it's a connector, we just say connector, and that you would pick the endpoint that you just created, and then we say what kind of object do we want to sync. So it's going to be users, but it could have been other information here, and this can be used to kind of bulk import information as well. And then we have some transformation scripts, which really take the data that's in that CSV file and map it over to OpenIAM. And so now I'm going to go ahead and choose the file that we just looked at, and I'm going to go sync it. Now, in real life, we wouldn't be doing it manually like this. It'd be looking at a location, and it'd be synchronizing it automatically. There's also a SFTP server or adapter that's built in, and we can use that to be able to receive messages. Okay. So there's a question, is the business rules only found in the enterprise edition, or is it in the open source edition as well? Unfortunately, business rules engine is only in the enterprise version at this time. Okay, and if you're using the community version and you wanted to do something similar, you can implement that same type of functionality within Groovy script. It may not be as end user oriented, but you can certainly go ahead and do that. Okay. So we come here, and I'm going to say sync now, and I'm going to kick this off. And at this point, the synchronization should have been already done. And if I look up, let's just pick the first user that I had on here. So this is our, Robert demo example, and we see that based on his title as a manager, he got those 2 Azure, group memberships, right? And if I look under user entitlements, I see all the things that were provisioned automatically, for this user. Okay, and there are different views here. So this is a resource view, which means that it's showing you by application what this person has. The role view would just give me the roles which I'm a member of, right? Which in this case is just the end user. Okay, and similarly, if that supervisors and things like that, I can see them here as well. The managed system viewer allows me to kind of compare data that's in OpenIAM with data that's in the target system, right? So I don't have to say necessarily go to AD to be able to do all the work that I need to do. If I just want to simply just compare 2 users and their attributes. Okay, so at this point, let's log in as this user. Okay, and I'm going to go over to the classic view and just grab that identity. In normal cases, I would have an email notification. Okay, so now I'm in, and at this point in the self-service portal, there's a number of things I can do. I can SSO into applications. I can view my own access, look at my direct reports. I can also do things like changing my own passwords. There's some new features in here, like for example, with SSH keys. So for example, if I'm let's say I'm a Linux admin, I can upload my key in here, and this can be used by the system to provision accounts for me in those Linux boxes that I need access to. So especially if there are hundreds or maybe thousands of servers that you're managing, this could be a way to kind of propagate those keys and give people access through that as well. So in this case, let's go ahead and create a request. So if I could go to create request, and see, I'm going to pick from a catalog. And the next thing is that I'm presented with these categories. These categories are defined by you. So these are just our out of the box default namings, but this can be restructured, and it can be hierarchical. So there can be other subcategories underneath this. So if I were to click on, say, business apps, I see O365 and AWS. But under directories, I see AD, and there's LDAP as well, right? So it's basically using this to kind of help simplify navigation of these things for the end user. So let's go to business apps, and let's request an access into AWS. Okay. And so we used our connector earlier to sync in all our AWS groups and policies. So these were all imported in, and there's literally a large number of them, but you see a description from them as well. And so let's say that I want, I want access to, these 3 policies, or I want to be, granted those policies. Okay, and then I can then pick here for a duration of how long I want it for. So maybe I only need this for, a couple of months. And at this point, when if this is approved and access expires, then the access will be taken away. So I don't have to remember to have to go and figure out, when does access expire for someone. It's going to get taken care of for you. Okay, and if all this looks okay, I'm going to go ahead and submit. And this is saying basically, you're creating a really short request. I'm saying, yeah, I know what I'm doing. And it will then go through. And if I look under my requests, I can see I have a request that's in flight, and it's gone to the AWS admin. They need to be the owner. Also in here, if I'm an approved user, there are tools here to look at, my history, the historical requests that I've put in, the request admin for administrators if they want to, maybe reassign requests which have come in, or to cancel them. Perhaps like a person leaves the firm and then reassign them. So these tools can be used to be able to do that kind of work. So let's log out and log in as the admin at this point. So I'm logged in now as the AWS admin, and I'm looking for my request. Now that request could have been approved from email as well. I didn't necessarily have to come in here, but if I do want to, then up here, up top, that's my inbox. The same thing I can see from my approvals option as well. And here, this is the Robert, demo example that we created. And if this all looks okay, then I am going to go ahead and approve. If I'm not the right person, I can also delegate this to someone else who I want to. I can add comments here and add attachments to this as well. And alternatively, also there's an out of office feature in here. So if I'm away, these requests can be rerouted to whoever is going to be covering for me at that time. Okay. In this case, it's going to go ahead and hit accept. Okay, and this drops off from my inbox, and we can then, at this point, access should be created. So let's log in as the admin again, and let's see if this was actually granted. So from here, I'm going to use the SSO, which was set up. So I'm going to go ahead and SSO to AWS. This is into the AWS console. I'm going to go to IAM. And we see our example was just created 1 minute ago, right? So we know that that connector is doing what it's supposed to do, and it go ahead and create that account, right? So this is basically the final validation to know that we're basically speaking to it, right? So let's hop back out. So we've kind of looked at a few things now so far in terms of the normal user lifecycle management stuff. So another thing which I wanted to kind of cover as probably the last thing for this call was to kind of talk about access review. And we're going to look at access review in a lot more detail in a separate session, but we can cover it in some cursory level, right? So basically the access review functionality, there are really two reasons why we're kind of doing it, right? So this is, well, actually maybe there are probably three reasons. One is you want to improve security. You want to be able to know who's got access to what and take away what they no longer need. It gives ongoing visibility into what people should have and kind of ongoing monitoring. And finally, we can't do our SOC 2 compliance activities without having proper visibility and controls into who's got access to what and how did they get that access, right? So the access reviews make that type of those reports along with the reports for access request really helpful for this. Okay. So if we were then the other part is that in terms of being able to perform these audits, half of what we just talked about kind of laid down the foundation for what you need to do in a user access review, right? So first is we need to define a scope that we have to do. Second, we need to collect data that we already did by having our connectors and synchronization tools in place. We can import data from all of our target systems, even ones that we don't have connectors for, using CSV files, bring them in and create a full picture of everything that we have. So once we have that picture, then we can go ahead and proceed, right? So in this case, let's just kind of talk about how to configure user access reviews. We're not going to go ahead and do a review because it's a separate topic in itself. Okay, but let's hop over to actually let's just hop over to Web Console. So if we go to access certification under the access control menu, first thing you'll see is a list of the current certifications which are there. But so let's go ahead and create a new one. And we're gonna, let's just say, right, we just give it a name. And the first thing that we need to choose here is really what kind of a certification are we gonna do? Are we going to certify by users or by application? So when we certify by users, we get to pick the user population, but we're certifying all the access that people have. We certify by applications. We can do it's a micro certification, and in a micro certification, you can pick the applications and the entitlements that you want to review, right? And many of our customers usually do end up doing a hybrid, so maybe a couple of times a year they'll do a full review, and then on a quarterly basis they will do a micro-certification of the sensitive applications. Okay, so let's say, so in this case, we'll go ahead and pick the applications. We'll pick how frequently we want to do it. Let's say we want to do it every quarter. The email template, which will define what's supposed to go out. And then we can designate a UAR manager. A UAR manager is the person who's kind of in charge of that audit, like to be able to, keep sight of what the review is going to do, and they can generate the report to hand off to the auditors. They can also, nudge people when they're not doing their part actively, right? So this person can be designated, and they'll also have access to a dashboard to see what kind of progress they're making, right? So let's just say this is going to be our AWS admin that we had earlier. And at this point, so now I'm going to go ahead and start picking my application. So let's say that I want to certify, AWS, and I can preview to see which users have this access. There's probably, okay, there are probably quite a few. Okay. And then once the next step is basically to look at which entitlements. So I can do all the entitlements in the applications that I pick, or I can just do one. And so let's say in this case, I want to do just these 2 entitlements, right? And you'll see that there's an entitlement owner here as well. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead, and then the next part is to go ahead and define a workflow. And so let's say the first level is going to be the user's manager itself. We're going to send them a reminder after 3 days. We're going to do it once. And there's an escalation path I can define here as well if I want to. So I can say, who do I escalate to? And so on and so forth. And then the next one could be the entitlement owner. And we could follow the same pattern there as well. And that's really it. So once we have this, we are ready to kick it off and execute it. Okay. And again, like I said, there's a separate demo that we have planned for the whole access certification. In a couple of weeks, we'll just go through it at that time. Okay. So let's kind of recap a little bit and just kind of go back to our PowerPoint. When we look at the overall solution, in terms of the overall, like a summary of what the capabilities are, besides the IGA capabilities that we kind of talked about today, what you get is like there's a platform which has got your core functionality between identity governance, web access management, and customer IAM kind of rolled into one. MFA is part of the stack as well. And then you have flexibility in terms of how you deploy. It can be on-prem, it can be in a cloud, and it's open. It's like there's the ways to customize it. You can use Groovy scripting. There's workflow, options. Everything's available as a REST API as well. And then from a scalability perspective, we can go from really small deployments to really large deployments. So the product can be scaled out horizontally. And in fact, if you're running in a cloud, Kubernetes environment, new services can be plugged into it, and the scripts already support that type of a deployment out of the box, right? And overall, so we think that it's basically DevOps and developer friendly in that respect. That's pretty much it for the demo that we had planned. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Okay, so there's a question about how do you set up an MFA role, and so the focus today was kind of it's really on the identity governance part. There will be a separate session on an MFA, and I can send that to you. And actually, in the enterprise version, there are actually a few more options available than there are in the community version. But today, there's even in the community version, there is some basic adaptive capability as well, which we can use, right? So there's a question about if there's a role modeling module. So there is a module to be able to manage and create role definitions. It doesn't go as far in terms of having a graphical interface where you can do role mining and things like that. So if you want to be able to define your roles in the business rules, then that capability is there. Okay, so there's a question about the architecture. If you we never really looked at the deployment architecture. So we kind of alluded to the fact that on a single server, everything could be run. And if you're doing a POC or a simple test, then that's fine. You can put everything onto a single node if you want to. If you're going to be deploying in a production environment, you should have a high availability configuration, in which case we recommend at least 3 servers, and largely because of the components that we use. And so those 3 servers would have a full replication of the components. You also have options if you want to, where you can separate out some of those components or separate the UI onto a separate layer. So there's quite a bit of options available in terms of how we can deploy. And if you have questions around that, we can get on a call offline and we can discuss that in more detail in terms of how we can do that. Okay, any other questions? Give it another minute and okay, it doesn't look like there are any questions. I just want to thank everybody for making the time for this, and we look forward to seeing you in the next session that we do. And any feedback that you have, feel free to drop us a note so we can address them in the next session or make improvements as we need to. But sorry, this question, whether this will be available for later view. Yes, we will send out actually a link to the session later this afternoon, and we'll most likely do a cleaner recording of this and post it up on I think YouTube as well. Okay, thank you very much for that feedback. Appreciate it. Okay, take care, everybody. Appreciate you guys making the time, and we'll talk to you next time.